A liberal TV host thought they could get away with shocking comments about Trump being a mistake. Karoline Leavitt shut them down live, and the fallout was instant. Was it deserved or too far? The atmosphere in the studio was electric, thick with tension so palpable it seemed the walls themselves were holding their breath. Cameras rolled, lights blazed down on the polished glass desk, casting sharp reflections that mirrored the intensity filling the room. Millions of Americans' eyes glued to their screens awaited what promised to be another headline-hitting segment. Karoline Leavitt, the newly appointed White House press secretary, sat poised, her posture impeccable, her expression unreadable. She was calm, collected, and ready. Across from her sat Victor Steele, a television host infamous for his aggressive interrogations of conservative figures. His smirk was the same one that had unnerved countless guests before her, but tonight was different. Miss Leavitt, Steele began, his voice dripping with condescension. Let's cut to the chase. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, fingers steepled. How does it feel to work for a man who has been nothing but a failure? A man who's lost his grip on reality, who, let's be honest, doesn't know what he's doing. Isn't it embarrassing defending someone who's clearly sick? The word sick echoed through the studio like a slap. The control room fell silent. Even the seasoned cameramen, accustomed to heated exchanges, stiffened. This wasn't just pointed questioning, it was a personal attack, and everyone knew it. Karoline blinked once, twice. Then, slowly she smiled, a calm, knowing smile that sent a ripple of unease across Steele's face. Are you finished, Mr. Steele? Her voice was even, betraying none of the tension in the room. Steele chuckled, attempting to regain his footing. Oh, I've just started. He thought he had the upper hand. He was wrong. Karoline tilted her head slightly, her gaze never wavering. You sit here, she began, her tone calm but edged. With Steele, in your comfortable chair, comb your fat paycheck, spewing lies to millions. You insult a man who has built businesses, created jobs, and fought for this country. She paused, letting the silence stretch, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. And yet, you contribute nothing but cheap insults. Her gaze sharpened. Tell me, Mr. Steele, how does it feel to be the one who's failing? The effect was immediate. Steele shifted in his seat, his smirk faltering. He opened his mouth to respond, but Karoline wasn't finished. You call President Trump sick of failure. But do you know what failure looks like, Mr. Steele? She leaned in, voice lowering just enough to make the moment feel heavier. Failure is sitting in that chair, using your platform to spread hate instead of truth. Failure is thinking you can silence people who refuse to bow to your bias. A suffocating hush fell over the studio. The producers behind the glass stared, frozen. This wasn't how the interview was supposed to go. Steele, usually the predator, was now the prey, and everyone could see it. He tried to regain control, his voice cracking slightly. That's rich. Coming from someone who know. Mr. Steele, Karoline cut him off, her voice sharper now. You don't get to spin this. She reached for the papers in front of her, holding them up for the cameras to catch. Let's talk facts, shall we? Under President Trump, the economy saw historic growth. Unemployment hit record lows. America became energy independent. Our military was strengthened. And yes, she shot him a pointed look. You sit here, pushing a narrative that completely ignores reality. Steele blinked, caught off guard by the sheer force of her words. He glanced at his notes, scrambling for a rebuttal that wouldn't come. His silence spoke volumes. Karoline leaned forward just an inch, enough to command attention. Your job is to inform, Mr. Steele. But what do you do instead? You mock. You belittle. You think that if you say something with enough arrogance, people will believe it. But Americans are smarter than you give them credit for. They see through this. They see you. The weight of her words settled over the room. Steele swallowed hard, his hands clenched beneath the table. In his earpiece, his producer's panicked voice crackled, wrap it up now. But it was too late. Karoline had already won. The silence was deafening. Victor Steele, the once dominant host known for dismantling his guests, sat frozen, his carefully crafted arrogance beginning to crack. Karoline, calm as ever, adjusted the mic clip to her blazer and spoke with measured confidence. You say President Trump is a failure, she said, but let's look at real failures, shall we? The people who mock leaders instead of contributing. The media figures who mislead millions while pretending to be journalists. Steele cleared his throat, fingers tapping anxiously on the desk. That's not, I don't need to twist your words, she cut him off. You do that all by yourself. Her voice softened but carried an edge that cut deeper than any shout could. You called President Trump sick. But tell me, Mr. Steele, do you know what sickness looks like? Sickness is when the media manipulates facts for personal gain. Sickness is when journalists no longer report, but attack. Sickness is when the truth is buried under an agenda. Steele tried again, voice faltering. This isn't no, Mr. Steele, Karoline said firmly. You made your bed. Now you lie in it. The room was still. Even the control room, usually buzzing with voices and quick commands, was eerily quiet. Victor Steele, for the first time in his career, was speechless. He sat back, hands gripping the edge of the desk. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was the one who asked the tough questions. He controlled the narrative. But now he was the target, and Karoline Leavitt wasn't just defending herself. She was defending the truth. You sit here, she continued, and mock a man who has given everything to this country. But tell me, Mr. Steele, what have you given? Other than division, other than lies. Steele opened his mouth. No words came out. The silence stretched unbearable. Somewhere behind the glass, his producer whispered into the earpiece again, this time, cold and final, Victor, you're done. His eyes widened. His breath caught. This wasn't just a failed interview. It was the unraveling of a career. Karoline leaned back, the calm in her demeanor never wavering. Millions of Americans are watching this, she said softly. And you know what they're thinking. Finally, someone is standing up to this nonsense. Finally, someone is speaking the truth. The red light on the camera blinked steadily, still lived, still capturing every second of his humiliation. Victor Steele had always controlled the narrative. For years, he was the man who asked the questions, twisted the conversations, and left guests stammering for words. Tonight, however, that iron grip on control slipped through his fingers like sand. His arrogance, the same weapon he had wielded against countless others, had become his downfall. Karoline Leavitt kept her gaze steady, her voice calm yet cutting. You sit here and mock a man who has given everything to this country, she said, each word like a hammer driving nails into the coffin of Steele's career. But tell me, Mr. Steele, what have you given? Other than division, other than lies. Steele opened his mouth, his face flushing a deep red. He searched for words, for the confidence that had carried him through hundreds of interviews. None came. The silence stretched unbearably long. The control room, which usually hummed with chatter, had gone deathly still. His producer, panicked, whispered urgently through his earpiece, say something, Victor. Take control. But Steele remained frozen, the weight of Karoline's words crushing whatever composure he had left. Then, the unthinkable happened. If you find these stories inspiring, and they motivate you to take action, please comment 9. If not, comment 0. Your feedback means a lot to us. Thank you for your valuable time. His earpiece crackled to life again, but this time the voice was cold. Final. Victor, you're done. His eyes widened, breath catching in his throat. Fired. On live television. In front of millions. Across from him, Karoline sat back, calm and unshaken. She didn't need to say another word. The damage was done. The world had just witnessed the end of Victor Steele. The air in the studio felt thick, suffocating. Steele's hands trembled as he tried to salvage what little dignity he had left. Miss Leavitt, he croaked, his voice cracking. I think we. Karoline raised a hand, stopping him cold. Mr. Steele, she said firmly, there's no recovering from this. You called the president a failure. Yet here you sit, unable to answer a single question without deflecting. His shoulders slumped. His voice, once booming with arrogance, was barely a whisper. I was just asking tough questions. No, Karoline's voice sharpened. A tough question challenges facts. A tough question seeks truth. You weren't asking tough questions, Mr. Steele. You were attacking a man who has done more for this country than you ever will. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Steele's own crew avoided meeting his gaze. Somewhere across America, millions of viewers sat glued to their screens, hearts pounding. Tears welled in some eyes, not out of sadness but relief. Finally, someone had said what they had been feeling. Finally, someone stood up to the condescension and bias. Steele let out a shaky breath. His mind raced through memories of interviewing presidents, celebrities, and political leaders, always the one in control. Not this time. His earpiece crackled again, the voice even colder. Victor, corporate just called. You're off the air after this segment. Blinking rapidly, he felt his entire career crumble. He turned to Karoline, desperation flickering in his eyes. But she didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Straight in her blazer, she delivered the final blow with calm authority. The American people deserve better than this, Mr. Steele, she said. And tonight, they got it. The red camera light blinked steadily, still live. Millions of viewers watched in stunned silence. A legacy shattered. The truth defended. And Karoline Leavitt, she had just made history. When the screen finally cut to black for a commercial break, the damage was irreversible. Victor Steele sat motionless, staring at the gleaming surface of the desk. His reflection stared back, pale, shaken, defeated. His hands, once steady, now trembled. Fired. On live television. In front of everyone. Karoline rose gracefully from her seat. Her face held no smugness, no triumph, just quiet strength. She glanced at Steele one last time, offering no words. What was there left to say? The world had seen it all. Outside, America erupted. Across living rooms, bars, and phones, people reacted. Some cried, some cheered. Many held their breath, hearts swelling with something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended instantly. Karoline Leavitt, truth wins, Steele fired, justice live. Twitter feeds flooded with clips of the moment. Facebook comment sections brimmed with gratitude. YouTube videos racked up millions of views within hours. Back in the network's newsroom, chaos reigned. Phones rang nonstop, executives shouted over each other, and the PR team scrambled for damage control. This is bad, a producer muttered, scrolling through the tidal wave of online backlash. It's everywhere. Another shook his head, half grinning. Are you kidding? This is the biggest moment in TV history. Karoline, now out of the studio, glanced at her buzzing phone. Texts, emails, calls. Her inbox overflowed with messages from colleagues, supporters, strangers. Thank you. You spoke for us. Finally, someone had the courage. She exhaled, steadying herself. Tonight wasn't about fame, it was about truth. Meanwhile, Victor Steele sat alone in his dressing room. The lights, once flattering, now seemed harsh and unforgiving. His reflection showed a man who had lost everything in a matter of minutes. His phone buzzed. A message from corporate: your contract has been terminated, effective immediately. He let out a slow, shaking breath. It was over. Outside the studio, people had gathered. Some waved American flags, others held their phones high, streaming live. One woman, tears streaming down her face, rushed toward Karoline. Thank you, she choked out. Thank you for standing up for us. An older man in a Vietnam veteran hat stepped forward, his voice breaking. You gave us our voice back tonight. Karoline smiled softly, blinking back her own tears. This wasn't about politics. It was about people, about truth. Back inside, Victor sat slumped in his chair, the door to his dressing room shut. Someone knocked. He ignored it. His phone buzzed again, more sponsors dropping him. The world wasn't just moving on, it was celebrating his downfall. Karoline stepped into the cool night air, the weight of the evening settling over her. She looked up at the sky, letting the breeze calm her racing heart. Her phone vibrated again, a text from an unknown number. You didn't just win a debate tonight. You gave America hope. Somewhere across the country, in homes and hearts, people felt it. Tears fell not out of sadness, but pride. Families hugged. Veterans saluted their screens. Mothers held their children tighter. Finally, they thought. Someone stood up. Victor Steele had walked into that studio thinking he'd expose weakness. Instead, the world had watched him unravel. Karoline Leavitt didn't just survive an ambush, she turned it into a moment that would echo through history. And as the city lights flickered, as millions replayed the night's events, one thing was clear: America had witnessed something rare. Not just justice, truth. Karoline Leavitt stepped into her car, closing the door behind her with a soft click. The weight of the night, the intensity, the battle of words, the crowd's reaction settled over her like a blanket. She looked out the window at the darkened city streets, lit only by the occasional streetlight flickering against the asphalt. Something had changed tonight, she thought. Not just for me, for everyone. She exhaled slowly, allowing herself a moment to breathe. Her phone vibrated relentlessly against her lap, texts from colleagues, friends, strangers, supporters, and even skeptics. Her gaze scanned the flood of notifications, but one message stood out. Just 6 words. Simple. Direct. Yet profoundly moving. You didn't just win. You made history. Karoline's chest tightened. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, not from exhaustion, not from pride, but from the overwhelming realization that tonight wasn't just about her. America had been watching, and America had felt something. Meanwhile, the internet erupted like wildfire. On YouTube, countless clips of the interview dominated the trending page, each thumbnail capturing the stunned face of Victor Steele and Karoline's unwavering composure. TikTok overflowed with emotional reactions, veterans saluting their screens, mothers holding their children tightly, young Americans expressing renewed hope in the values they thought had been lost. Facebook groups ignited with heated discussions, and hashtags like Karoline Leavitt Truth, Hope Restored, and Victor Steele Fired trended globally. But beyond the viral storm, something deeper stirred. Families gathered around living rooms with teary eyes, whispering, finally someone said it. Veterans placed weathered hands over their hearts, voices cracking with gratitude. People who had long felt voiceless saw themselves reflected in Karoline's defiance and integrity. Tonight, truth had won. Back inside the cold dressing room, Victor Steele sat motionless. His phone screen glowed in the dim light, his inbox filling with resignation emails from sponsors distancing themselves with clinical coldness. Effective immediately. Termination confirmed. Future engagements canceled. The man once untouchable, whose sharp tongue had dismantled countless careers, now faced the chilling silence of his own downfall. A soft knock broke the stillness. "Victor?" A producer's hesitant voice filtered through the door. "They're waiting for a statement." Victor let out a bitter laugh, empty, hollow. A statement? What could he possibly say? That I underestimated her? That I thought I'd win? He glanced at the mirror. Pale, shaken, broken. For years he wielded arrogance like armor. Tonight, it had shattered. Tell them, his voice was barely a whisper, rough with defeat. Tell them I have nothing to say. The door closed. And with it, an era ended. Outside the studio, crowds had gathered. American flags waved gently in the night breeze. Phones recorded live streams, capturing the raw aftermath of what many now call the most iconic moment in modern television. Among the crowd, a woman pushed forward, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered to Karoline as she stepped out. "Thank you for standing up for us." Karoline's throat tightened. Another figure emerged, an older man, his face weathered by years and etched with experience. A Vietnam veteran's cap resting on his head. His voice broke as he said, You gave us our voice back tonight." Blinking back tears, Karoline placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "No, sir," she replied softly. "You never lost it. You just needed someone to remind the world you still had it." Meanwhile, back at the network's headquarters, chaos reigned. Phones rang off the hook. Executives barked orders. Public relations teams scrambled for damage control. On every screen, Victor Steele's face flickered, frozen in that moment of speechless defeat. "This is bad," a junior producer muttered, scrolling through Twitter. "This is everywhere." Another smirked, shaking his head. "Bad? This is history. People aren't just watching, they're feeling." Across town, Karoline's car turned onto Pennsylvania Avenue. Her phone buzzed again, a call. She glanced at the screen, heartbeat quickening. Unknown number. Hesitating, she answered. Karoline, a familiar voice crackled through. Confident. Grateful. Proud. It was President Trump. "I saw what you did," he said, his tone warm but serious. "And let me tell you something, I couldn't have done it better myself." Her lips quivered into a smile. Tears welled, not from the weight of the compliment, but from the recognition that this was bigger than any job title. Bigger than her. "Thank you, Mr. President," she managed, voice thick with emotion. "I just did what was right." He chuckled. "That's what makes it right." As the call ended, Karoline glanced out the window. The White House loomed ahead, majestic against the night sky, a symbol of resilience. Tonight, America remembered who she was. Inside the White House press room the next morning, Karoline sat surrounded by letters, handwritten notes from veterans, emails from mothers thanking her for defending their values, crayon drawings from children, the misspelled words making her smile through the tears. Her fingers traced one letter's shaky handwriting. "I fought for this country. Tonight you fought for me. God bless you." Her breath caught. The weight of that responsibility was immense, but so was the honor. The world was still reeling. Every major news outlet dissected the moment. Analysts debated the implications. Critics scrambled to spin narratives, but nothing could erase what had happened. Karoline hadn't just defended a man, she had reignited a nation's belief in truth. Walking into the West Wing, staff members stood and clapped, not just for her, but for what she represented. Courage, integrity, voice. "Miss Leavitt," a voice called out. She turned. President Trump stood there, arms crossed, a knowing smile creasing his face. "You did good," he said simply. She nodded, voice soft but firm. "I did what was right. That's what makes it good," he grinned. As she took her seat in the press room, Karoline felt it deep in her bones. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. America was awake. Truth had been spoken, and the world was listening. If this moment touched your heart, if it made you proud, if it reminded you of what we stand for, then share this story. Because tonight we witnessed history. And together, we will keep that truth alive. There are moments that transcend television screens and become symbols of hope, courage, and truth. When Karoline Leavitt sat before the camera, facing hostility, she wasn't just defending a person or a policy, she was standing up for core values we often forget. truth, loyalty, and the voice of conscience. 1. Truth can be buried, but it can never be defeated. When faced with condescending words and bias, Karoline didn't respond with anger, she chose calm. That calm became her sharpest weapon. In that moment, she taught us a powerful lesson. Even when surrounded by lies, let truth be your shield and sword. Have you ever stayed silent, fearing that speaking up would isolate you? Karoline's courage shows us that sometimes one brave voice can silence a room full of prejudice. 2. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite fear. Karoline walked into that studio under immense pressure. She knew the traps lay before her, knew millions were watching, waiting to see her stumble or stand tall. And remarkably, she didn't back down. We've all faced moments where fear grips us, but this story reminds us courage is not about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared. Sometimes those trembling hands and pounding hearts mean you're doing something truly worth it. 3. One person standing up can give millions their voice back. When Karoline spoke, people across the nation, veterans, single mothers, everyday Americans wept. Not out of sadness, but because they felt seen. For years, many felt silenced, mocked, and ignored. That night, their voice echoed through hers. You may never realize your strength until you become someone's beacon of hope. Remember, you don't need a title or a platform to spark change. Sometimes speaking the truth when everyone else stays quiet can ignite hope in hearts that have given up. 4. Loyalty is a wealth money can't buy. Karoline didn't just defend a man, she defended the principles of loyalty and integrity. In a world obsessed with convenience and popularity, she reminded us true values like loyalty, truth, and kindness never go out of style. Ask yourself, are you loyal to your values? To those who trust and stand by you. In a whirlwind of criticism, loyalty is the anchor that keeps you grounded. 5. Be the spark when others lose their flame. After the interview, a veteran told Karoline, "You gave us our voice back tonight. Thank you for fighting for us." That wasn't just gratitude, it was proof that one courageous act can rekindle hope in someone who thought it was gone forever. If you see someone losing hope today, remind them you're not alone. Will you stay silent, or will you be the voice of change? Karoline's story isn't just about a televised debate, it's a reminder that truth deserves to be defended. Loyalty deserves to be honored. And one person with the courage to speak up can inspire a generation. What are you ready to be that person? Don't wait for the opportunity, be the opportunity.